Welcome everybody to today's podcast as we welcome Gemma and Jessica from Cog-Spark. Now, for full transparency, I've known Jess now for going on 3 years, and I've always been incredibly impressed with Jess's passion and knowledge and background and expertise. Gemma, I've known you for about 6 months, but it's been a pleasure in this short period of time. But no, the reason why we have Jess and Gemma here today is these ladies are very much the experts and the thought leaders in this particular space. So when we're talking about something so important and so in the news, there's no better experts in the field than Jessica and Gemma to talk to us and to share some insights on today's podcast. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for dialing in to this podcast as we talk about the very, very important area of identifying and supporting children who are potentially self-harming. So identifying and supporting children who are potentially self-harming. So on that note, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Gemma and Jessica from Cog-Spark. Ladies, thank you for coming, first of all, to the podcast. How are you both doing?
Yeah, very well. And thank you so much for inviting us, Matt.
Absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Matt.
Absolute pleasure. Gemma, we'll start with yourself. Just set the scene for us a little bit about Gemma, your backgrounds, your expertise. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so my background is I trained to be a mental health nurse and worked in the NHS for around 15 years, moving to become a clinical team manager. And the work that I did in the NHS in clinical settings was very much around supporting children, young people and adults with a particular kind of focus around self-harm and eating disorders. And then at the age of 40, decided to move out of the NHS and into education. So I've been working in education now for about 13 years, really around supporting schools and leaders to embed and sustain wellbeing approaches. What drives me, and I think has driven me from the very first moment that I made the decision to train to be a mental health nurse, is really the importance of creating safe spaces and spaces for us and educators to support our children and young people so that they have the confidence and the knowledge to be able to offer that care and connect children to the right support. And that's why both myself and Jessica then developed and set up Cog-Spark, so bringing both of our skills together. I don't know whether now, Jess, you want to do a little bit of an introduction of kind of your background.
Yeah, definitely, Gemma. And I think in a way we almost started at opposite places.
Yes.
So I actually started in education. By that point, I'd already had an academic background in psychology, thought that I wanted to be a psychology teacher. I did that for a while, but always found myself, working in pastoral roles, safeguarding lead. Any young people, experiencing challenges, it was like, Jess, where are you? We need you. And very quickly, I realized that actually my passion was mental health in education. So in more recent years, I then took a sidestep, which is where I basically met yourself, Matt. That passion then fueled into training and consultancy work, because I realized that there was a real lack of appropriate support at that point in time. For educators. I was quite lucky, with my background in psychology, that I knew how to respond to things like self-harm. But so many of my colleagues were thrown in at the deep end and just expected to kind of get on with it, which, when you're dealing with such delicate, sensitive things, massive ask. And I'm currently doing a PhD now in psychological medicine, but specialising in mental health within schools. So it's brilliant to be here. I met Gemma along that journey. More recently, Cog-Spark was born.
Wonderful. Thank you very much to you both for that lovely introduction. And I've learned a lot about both of you. Jess, I've known you for 3 years. I didn't know any of that. So it's very useful for me. Good stuff. We'll cut to the chase. We'll start with one of the most important questions, I think, today. So how does schools, and therefore the leaders, the teachers, everyone within the school, so a school or multi-academy trust setting, how do they strive to identify, and that's the key word I want to focus on at the moment. How do they strive to identify children that are potentially self-harming or considering self-harming? What does that typically look like from both of your experiences so far? And I will really, again, want to focus on that word identify. Gemma, do you mind if I come to you to start off with?
No, not at all. And I think it's such a powerful question. And I think it's one of those that, for all of us, to kind of stop and pause and, thinking about that identifying. I think one of the hard things is that for many children and young people, self-harm is something that remains hidden. So that immediately is, one of the challenges for all of us working in education. I think first off, it's really important to highlight and recognise that approximately 1 in 6 young people will be engaging in some form of self-harm. So there's something there to think about, that actually what we might not necessarily see on the surface that might make us curious or think about, what those challenges or risks might be, that actually we kind of hold in mind that, any young person could be at risk of using self-harm very much as a coping mechanism as well. So firstly, it's about holding in mind that self-harm is behaviour with meaning. So there is meaning to it as well. So needing to explore that. The other thing with self-harm, because I think if we don't talk about what self-harm is, then we're not knowing what we might potentially need to be looking out for as well. So some of that understanding around what it looks like and what it means. So it's both harmful and a coping strategy. And what I mean by that is that for a young person who might be experiencing emotional distress, so there might be a bereavement that they've experienced, they might have anxiety about their exams, something that is going on for them. If they don't have that support mechanism or feel that they've got that, then life can feel incredibly overwhelming. And when it's overwhelming and a young person might not feel that they can cope, unfortunately, sometimes what happens is they might use self-harm as that coping mechanism. And in the moment, it can be quite helpful. So if you're experiencing emotional distress or anxiety or overwhelm as a child or young person, using a form of self-harm can numb those difficult feelings and emotions. So in the moment, it might be helpful. But longer term, there's that internal shame, and almost if we don't, as educators and adults, be curious and inquisitive to kind of notice those kind of changes going on for a young person, we might miss maybe some of those cues or some of those opportunities to kind of be curious and think about what else might be going on for them. So the work that me and Jess have done is very much about recognising that we're all in that unique position because of those relationships that we have with children and young people, but educators every day. So for educators and working in schools, that question about identifying it's really about noticing those patterns of change. So what patterns of change are we thinking about? So it could be during the summer months wearing, long-sleeved clothing, even when it's warm, maybe to hide something, recognising it's hidden. It could be avoidance of PE, as an example. So there might be kind of those subtle cues or patterns that we can start to think, maybe let's delve a little bit deeper. There might be something else going on.
Yeah.
Might be
so it's that vigilance, isn't it? It sounds to me like vigilance and incredible attention to detail.
Absolutely. And one of the things there, Matt, that I would say, and I'm sure Jess will also expand today as well, is so as adults, we are present, and in education, staff are present every day physically, but we're not always present. Our mind might be full of other things, so truly being present to notice those patterns, those clusters, any sort of change that might be to the norm. So sometimes, kind of people talk about warning signs, but the danger there is when it comes to self-harm, there might not be those overt warning signs. That pupil or student could be excelling in everything on the exterior, but actually internally struggling. So maybe a drop in concentration or school performance. So yeah, absolutely. That's what I would be saying, Matt.
Yeah, it's so hard, isn't it? Without that incredible detail, as we just said, that without that incredible focus to change, potential change, it's almost invisible unless, like you said, that the word, so one of the things I picked up from there, Gemma, is you've got to know your children.
Yeah,
The teachers have got to know the children. They've got to know their behavior. They've got to have an understanding of what quote unquote norm looks like. That's really interesting.
Yeah. And I think, Jess, we'd probably both be coming from that place as well, that, it can be quite anxiety provoking or, worry about not doing the right thing, or even listening to us today and thinking, have I, missed an opportunity? Absolutely not. It's about us collectively together thinking about, building on that confidence and that knowledge and recognition of the importance of those connections as well.
Jess, what's your thoughts around this whole keyword we're using so far today, which is identify?
I think for me, Matt, and you've hit the nail on the head beautifully. I find it astonishing that you might be looking at two injuries on two young people that look identical, but it's the story behind it. And, as you've said, the more that we know, even just those, day-to-day, everyday interactions, just the normal conversations, being able to just spot and be curious really about any change. And I think it's trusting our gut instinct, Matt. I think often, teachers and educators, we know that something is off. We know that something isn't right. So it's really, for me, about having that bravery and that courage to dare to ask, even just starting with something simple like, I've noticed that you seem different lately. How are you doing? Checking in, doing what we do best, which is one, build our relationships, and to create those situations of safety for young people to be able to share.
That's really interesting. Thank you very much indeed. And the next question of today, I guess, which is where I'm sure the audience listening will be really, really thankful and really, in very much they would welcome is some help for themselves in dealing with these incredibly challenging situations. So the question is, what are the in your experiences, the key, most strongly recommended kind of guidance, if you like, so we'll call it hints and tips, that you can kind of pass on, you can kind of share to school leaders, classroom practitioners, support staff, everybody, as we said at the beginning, in schools and mats. What are your most recommended hints and tips for supporting children that are potentially considering self-harming or are self-harming? So what would those recommended, let's call them techniques or hints and tips or strategies, what would that look like? We'll start with yourself, Jess, this time, if that's okay.
Absolutely, Matt. The first thing I want to do for our listeners is to reassure, because I'm pretty sure that in the next few minutes you're expecting to be hearing me, kind of adding to your workload and, creating more stress for you as a professional. Not at all. We're going back to basics. So I think one of the key things, Gemma, that we often talk about is, first of all, we've got to start with ourselves as the adult. So if I'm, not entering into that, conversation in a calm way, that might then actually fuel whatever's happening for the young person. So we're going to be calm. We do that every day. It's not easy. Sometimes we have to fake it until we make it. So inside, you might be feeling very worried, concerned, frightened for the young person, but we're not going to let that show. So I think for me, that's kind of where it starts. We're also going to listen more than we talk. Gemma, I picked up before that comment that you made about, often we're scared, we're reluctant, we're concerned about, might we do the wrong thing, say the wrong thing? Well, guess what? We're going to half what we're saying. We're going to listen twice as much. Maybe just starting with those open questions. We're not giving advice, at least not straight away. We're really just helping the young person to feel heard and really then enabling them to know that they're not alone anymore. We're walking through this storm with them. So really nice, open, non-judgmental language. So even just simple phrases, Matt, like, thank you for trusting me with that. I'm really glad you've shared. can you tell me a bit more about how you've been feeling, or, why it might be, that you are, perhaps coping in this way. So really, I think for schools, it really comes back to our clear safeguarding procedures. Staff know where they're going, what their next steps are. Do we know as individuals, how we might then be able to perhaps involve parents or carers in appropriate ways? And, I guess more than anything, first of all, ensuring safety. What about for yourself, Gemma? I think you had a few thoughts as well.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Jess. And, as you were saying, just so important, isn't it? It's that art of like listening, as we've all been saying this morning, haven't we? That listening to understand. So I think just adding, is just considering and thinking about supporting a child who self-harms is not about fixing in the moment. It's about holding that space safely and linking them with the right support. So, thinking about within your settings who that available trusted adult is, but maybe actually ensuring that we often talk about having a trusted adult, but what happens if that trusted adult isn't available? So myself and Jess will often, in training or meeting, just get to think about as well, really that whole school approach. So, it is everybody's business. It is every staff member's. We've gone into school settings where they've identified the receptionist is the person that connects and notices. It could be security. It could be lunchtime supervisor. So really, that whole school approach really is about everybody, making sure it's not just that one individual, so maybe a couple of individuals as well. The idea as well about creating those safe spaces, and what I would say to the listeners as well is that those safe spaces that are brave spaces for children and young people. So if a child or young person shares something with us that might be hard to hear for whatever reason, it's recognising that they have gifted us or a staff member with maybe some of the most difficult feelings and emotions, and worried that people might judge. Because self-harm in itself, and if we think about language as well, so unfortunately, terminology around attention seeking, which not being used as much, but it's actually about those unmet needs and what we as educators can do to create those safe spaces. And really that whole school approach does matter as well. So thinking about peer-to-peer as well and friendships. But I think the main message that I'd also want to convey is that schools can absolutely make a difference. So my first kind of step in transition from the NHS was into university settings, supporting staff and students. And students would share, we would explore what had helped previously and maybe what had hindered. And students would share, and they could remember from primary school or secondary school, the time, the place, and the person where somebody truly cared out loud, offered that support in a compassionate and understanding way. So all of the things that we will be doing each day are the things that can make a huge difference.
Thanks, Gemma. And I think a key thing that I just quickly scribble down here is this is about positively impacting a school or MAT's culture. This is when you talk about whole school or whole MAT. This is about optimizing a culture. It's about a culture of awareness, a culture of detail, a culture of being brave.
Absolutely.
For the staff to be brave. And, I'm intrigued and incredibly grateful for you to using language like safe spaces. That's kind of new to me, and I'm kind of processing that right now. But the importance of being brave and asking the question and understanding, as you said, Gemma and Jess, hearing what you may hear back from that child may be a bit of but you've asked the question and they've started that support journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thanking that young person, that's one of the other things that, me and Jess will also say, if a young person, I always kind of see, and through clinical work, but also then the work that me and Jess have been doing for a number of years, together, but also individually as well, is that if a young person shares, for example, that they have been using self-harm as a coping mechanism, they've gifted me, they've shared something, they've trusted, and it's really important for me to demonstrate and thank them. But we only do those things through those safe and those brave spaces.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. And we're just going to be coming back to Gemma and Jess in a second, because I'd love for them to tell us a little bit about their organisation, Cog-Spark, and how they help schools and mats across the country. But just before we do that, if any of you listening to this podcast today, or perhaps watching us on YouTube, if you've got any learners in mind that you need assistance with, you've got concerns with, you want to bounce their behavior or difference in behavior, the things that Jess and Gemma have spoke about today, off experts, you've got Jess and you've got Gem here, and they will share their contact details at the end. Perhaps you're a school or mat listening or watching this and thinking, we need to do more. We need to do a little bit more. We need to make this and blend this into our culture, ethos, our things we talk about, what things we highlight, not just at senior leadership team, but across the school. Vigilance means everybody, not one or two. So if you are a school or a mat that wants to bounce ideas off each other, if you want to bounce ideas off experts, if you're thinking about the culture, if you've got a difficult child or children in mind or anything else, you're actually in a safe space here, actually, with Gemma and Jessica. So get in touch with them. I'm sure they'll be very, very happy to help you. Super. I think now is the time. If I can hand back to you guys, would you mind us telling the school and mat leaders a little bit about Cog-Spark? So what does helping schools and mats typically look like for you guys on a daily, weekly basis, please? Let's just have a vision as to how you make this difference.
Definitely. And I think really Cog-Spark was born from a place of really us seeing the tangible results very quickly of bespoke training. So our average week, Gemma, looks like lots of meetings, really wanting to live and breathe that particular mat, that particular school or organisation, because Cog-Spark doesn't sit separately to those that we work with. We partner with you. So for us, it's very much about those bespoke, tailor-made training or resources, because we've seen from the other side as well as of trainers kind of going in with generic training that actually doesn't always meet needs. So for us, it was more about wanting to partner with organizations. What it looks like, Matt, on the ground depends on what people need, to be honest. There are no two programs or projects that ever look the same. So anything from workshops to full training days, entire training programs. It could be on-demand resources, but whatever it is, it's crafted specifically for that organization.
Yeah. And one of the things that I guess, Jess, that I've learned from our relationship is that no two schools are the same, no two mats are the same, and no two children are the same. And one of the things that you both highlighted very, very clearly at the beginning is something may look the same. It was yourself, Jess, but actually the story behind it is very different, which again is just further confirmation that no two individuals, schools or mats are the same. So kudos for the bespoke element to that. Gemma, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think very much like Jess, so obviously, Cog-Spark came about, well, it was in a moment that we came up with the name Cog-Spark, wasn't it? Working together, leading on the Senior Mental Health Lead Programme for a number of years.
Yeah.
And obviously, as Jess was saying, we've both, delivered, packages or training that's previously been written. But wanting to, and we had a number of organisations that were directly approaching us, really wanting us to kind of be involved in supporting them on their journey. So it just allowed that opportunity together. And as Jess, you were just talking there about, how we bespoke, and we're here today thinking about self-harm, aren't we? And we had one school request on demand self-harm training, and that was created. We just love the fact that I think that's our passion. I think if I'm wear my heart on my sleeve, my passion is that actually we are meeting with and working with collaboratively and collectively for the needs of the children and young people. Each need unique.
Yeah, agreed.
To us, bespoke training is the way that it should be. It shouldn't that we have preconceived ideas of what it will look like for somebody.
Yeah, thanks, Gemma. That's great.
So fortunate, Gemma, as well. You know, I think if I just make one final point is that we're quite unique in that we've got the clinical, the education, and the academic grounding. So I think that's really why we're able to be so much more flexible, you know, in you know, kind of being able to really effectively meet those needs as well.
Super, thank you. As with all podcasts that we do at the Education Showroom, we keep them to the point and reasonably short. So please, with that in mind, understand that we've given you a flavour today. We've given you an idea as certainly not a comprehensive A to Z. We've given you enough to hopefully help you and to give you a really nice value-added podcast today. Where I'm going with it is please get in touch with Gemma and or Jessica for more information, more detail, how they would help deal with these challenging situations and support you, your students, your colleagues and your school or MATs as a whole. On that note, just as we're wrapping up, Jessica, Gemma, would you mind just sharing your contact details? So any viewer or listener, if they choose to get in touch with you, they can do. Would you mind just sharing those, please?
Absolutely. So the best and most effective way of getting in contact with us is on our website, which is cogspark.com. And on there, you will find a contact form. You can reach us that way. And we are also very, very open to you reaching out to us through LinkedIn as well. But that's just a little sneak peek of our website. So cogspark.com, super easy to remember. You can find us there underneath our contact information. And the form is just there.
Thank you very much indeed. And I know you're both active on LinkedIn. I watch, I look at your posts every day. I wake up in the morning and go, where are they today? What they're doing today? It's lovely. Thank you very much for thanks very much for joining us. It's always great to catch up, and it's even better to talk about such challenging, really, really difficult topics, but talking about not remedies, but things that we can do positively, things we can be aware of, hints, tips, techniques to support school and MAT leaders, to support everyone in schools, handle, be aware, be observant, be detailed. And I think something, again, I've mentioned it earlier in this podcast, I'll say it again, which I think is a nice way to finish, make it a part of every school or MAT's culture, is this thirst for attention to detail. Are you spotting difference? What are you observing? Does it warrant a conversation? Super. Thank you very much to Jessica. Thank you to Gemma. I wish you a great rest of the week, and thanks for joining us on the Education Showrooms podcast.
Thank you, Matt.